Well, good evening or morning or wherever you are in the world. My name is Michelle Fenstermaker. I'm strategy director at Fitch and really, really happy that you were able to spend time with us today. Hopefully everyone here can see this. Welcome to Generation E. There's been a lot of talk about what we mean by Generation E, and I'm really, really hoping that we can unpack some of that when we talk about the generations today. You know, one of the things that you'll hear at Fitch is us talking repeatedly about the only way to achieve true differentiation in this red thread is connecting brand, customer, and experience. So what will be a little bit different from this presentation today, I will be talking a lot about customer perspective. Earlier today, you heard Morgan Holt, my strategy cohort in the London office, talked about the need for an experience signature. And the more those experiences match a real customer need, the more successful a brand and retailer will be. So many of you, I am sure on this call, will be familiar with the concept of generations. You probably are going to be able to identify and have some nuggets. If this was interactive, I'd have everyone out there share with what generation you're part of as we move through this. But my hope through the next few minutes is that we do have a few thought starters that you can take back to your businesses. So let's move on. I would like to start with a public service announcement, and this is really a disclaimer. This is solely the opinion of the presenter, and this is not endorsed by demographers, sociologists, marketers, or even Billy Idol, who's from my generation, who termed Generation X as an official new generational cohort. I don't get to name them, select them, or even defend this idea of a new generational cohort. Quite honestly, as I was preparing for this, I was fascinated by how people even decide what to call these, and even more so why a name would stick. A little fun fact for those of you who follow this type of thing, it's much like how they come up with the names for hurricanes. I did a little digging on that. Hurricane names are chosen by the World Meteorological Organization. There are 6 lists of names for the Atlantic and the Pacific every 6 years. The list of names repeats, and they will not repeat a name that is attached to some very destructive storm. They have retired those names. So in 2020, which is the year that we're in, we get the names from 2014. So you know, if in 2020 we get to the names Yolanda and Zeke, we are in big trouble. So anyway, I thought that was a nice fun fact. Let's get into what we mean by generations. Societal generations really are a relatively modern idea, to be honest. They were discussed in the 19th century by European intellectuals, and they were really refined in the 20th century. To get it down to the basic definition, all the people born and living at about the same time, and this is the most important part, regarded collectively, right? Generations are usually captured over about a 15, sometimes 20-year period. So time is really the primary definition of a generation. We're often asked, well, is that a helpful way to group people to you? You work with brands, you work with retailers, and even looking into their own businesses. And we always have a two-part answer to that, yes and no. We like to really view them as a snapshot into a particular segment of a group who really together is moving from life stage to life stage. And that's really important as we start to unpack this a little bit further in the presentation. You really want to understand from a generation, is this a defining sticky moment? You heard Alistair Lennox, one of my associates from New York, talk about sticky and frictionless behavior. Is this something that's going to stick with the generations? Or as they move from life stage, they move from adolescence to teenage years, to starting a family, to starting a new career, and then they adopt the behavior of the generations before them. So what makes this challenging when you look at it from a year's perspective is that if your brand or service is designed for either an older or younger market, the generations move through the cycle with different attitudes and mindsets that can be quite different from their predecessors. So going to be really critical there to look at that. So how is a generation formed, right? There really are four key ways a generation is born. Time creates them, moments shape them, mindset defines, and it'll be no surprise to you that digital divides. And hopefully you were able to listen to Linda right before me talk about the role of digital in the future. And I think that it's going to be really, really important, that fourth point, as we move on to identifying who Generation E is or who we believe them to be. Let's focus a little bit on that time creates for a moment. We don't pick a time or place for our birth, right? I know all of us, sometimes I think about, wouldn't that be cool? Some time spans produce more births than others, so think boomers and busters. And I've heard a lot of talk about people expecting this quarantine baby boom. I don't want to burst your bubble, but what we've been researching is that disasters have little effect, if any, on birth rates. So, and actually this pandemic most likely will discourage some couples from having children, purely from, some of it's a little bit of fear, but there's also some economic reasons for that. And when we compare that to the boomers, you know, the boomers were the result of this post-war euphoria, positive outlooks, financial security. So if anyone was hoping for a huge population surge, we might not get it just yet. When you think about moment shape, so we look at number 2, that's another variable that's really out of our control, but it is in our control how we respond to those moments, and we'll talk about that as well. Number 3, mindset defines. Some would say that mindset is very personal and unique to an individual. We choose what mindset we want when we wake up in the morning. For example, I don't know about you, but my mindset was very positive this morning because I realized it was Tuesday. I've totally lost track of what day of the week it is during these last couple of months. But I'm not talking about that kind of positive or negative mindset daily. I'm talking about the mindsets that emerge because of huge monumental events that occur during our formative years especially, and that definitely shapes our generation. The other one is finally talking about digital. And digital divides. Digital adoption has been key in dividing generations. Common sense tells us as new technology emerges, generations adopt it. And if it arrived during the formative years, it becomes a way of life. Perhaps COVID has changed all that. I know that we've talked about that a lot during the day, about the role of COVID and digital and technology. I will connect the dots about what that means generationally in a minute. So let's have a little fun here and let's look at time creates. Now, these ranges are debated, discussed, different demographers, you know, there'll be some crossover. I tried to clean it up for you a little bit, and they only vary a year or two based on the definitions. I typically share the years like this is 1975 to 1992 and so forth, but I don't know about you, but doing math on the fly when we've done these presentations in person can be a little bit challenging. So in order to demonstrate that, what I thought would be fun is I know a lot of people are missing sports. I know my husband's missing sports. So I wanted to just do a little bit of a reference with some famous sports figures here. So we've got the silent generation, right? That's roughly a 75 to 92 years old. We've got the Golden Bear there, right? Jack Nicklaus from Columbus, Ohio. He's 80. He's 80. We've been following Jack. He, I think, was a professional golfer starting at 21. I think he retired and continued to professionally golf through 65 years old. It's a lot of age, life stages that we saw him go through. Always been part of the silent generation, but he had multiple life stages that were part of his golfing career. We know that gentleman in the top right. A lot of us are watching the documentary on who we believe the greatest basketball player of all time, Michael Jordan. Michael Jordan's 57, and that was kind of hard for me to grasp when I did a little background there. We followed him from 21 years old to 40, again, multiple life stages. Got to show Tom Brady, right? I tried to have a representation of some different sports there. He's a young Gen Xer. Tom Brady's 42. And then on the flip side, right next to him is Miss Serena Williams, who would be considered an old millennial. She's 38. So these cuspers can often adapt the behaviors either a generation ahead or a generation below. And then finally, Chloe Kim, who is part of Generation Z and 20 years old. So again, time creates, right? And that is totally out of our control. The one thing about Generation Z is they have been nicknamed the final generation. And that seems kind of doom and gloom, right? Is it because Z is the last letter in the alphabet? Why are they the final generation? Well, what we've been learning is because the speed of our culture is really starting to compress these 15-year segments into these little bite-sized zip file of a few years, a few months, and dare we even say moments, that it's going to be extremely difficult to understand the overlapping influences of just one generation at a time. But it's going to be more this constantly influx, innovative, wow-inducing, global collective, so to speak. So are they the final generation that everyone was predicting? Well, no, or not, right? There's this generation called Generation Alpha. And wait for it, everybody. This will make you feel old. This is the babies of the millennials. Okay? Now, we don't know enough about Generation Alpha yet, right? There are all kinds of predictions for this generation. We don't know how many of them there are going to be just yet. But there's predictions about they'll be the wealthiest, they'll be the most educated, of course they'll be the most technologically advanced. And we'll save that for another day. We could have a whole presentation on Generation Alpha, but I just wanted that for impact. So is Generation Z the final? Who knows? Time will tell. We'll see that. Let's talk a little bit next about the moments that shape the generations, right? So the presenters have been talking all day about the moment that we're living in, right? And you don't see that. By design, I did not put that up there yet because we'll talk about that a little bit later. These moments were based on what was happening to us during our most formative years for it to really shape us. So what's interesting, you have the silent generation, all about the Great Depression, right, and what affected them. And if you studied history and studied anything about generations, it's really fascinating how generations start to repeat themselves. I highly recommend looking into that. The baby boomers were all about post-war prosperity, right? Generation X, which is my generation, scandals and emergencies. Also the smallest generation, called also nicknamed the baby busters. The millennials, or Gen Y, moments that shape them, right? 9/11, the war on terror. And then finally Gen Z. And Gen Z, now could we say COVID was a defining moment for Gen Z? They're still very formative. COVID probably had far more reaching generational shaping than maybe just Gen Z. Their big moment is constant connectivity. Can you imagine growing up in a time that you have access to every crisis, every hardship, every burden in the world 24/7? So as I mentioned before, these moments are really out of our control as brands and retailers, but thriving is still possible. The reason I put this image up here, that is some executives from P&G back in the days of the Great Depression. They continue to advertise and stay top of mind and actually started commercial broadcasting for the very first time during the Great Depression, right? And there's other examples of people like Kellogg's and Camel and other brands. They marketed, they innovated, they maintained confidence that the crisis would end. And at the end of that, the people rewarded them for that. Let's talk about our mindsets. Let's dig into that. And then I can't see everybody. I don't know how many people are on, but I would have you kind of raise your hand if we was doing this in person to see if you connect with this or not. It's inevitable that certain mindsets emerged and are a result of the monumental changes that shape us. Most of these are what we call sticking moments for a generation rather than the result of a life stage. So you think about the silent generation, very much conservative and conformist in their attitudes and their behaviors. We have our baby boomers, the optimists, also the challengers. And that's playing out in this COVID time too. I'll talk about that as we wrap up. Generation X, more of the skeptical and independent, we can get it done because we've lived through a lot type of mentality. Our millennials, confident and hopeful, right? Even despite they were supposed to be the most financially successful generation. They had the recession of 2008 kind of just stop them in their tracks, yet they still maintained confidence and hope. And then finally, Gen Z, extremely protective and very self-aware. So one of the things, these mindsets impact how we view the world and hence directly and indirectly affect our choices for brands and retailers. And this definitely holds true for the crisis we find ourselves that we're in now. And then the last thing that defines a generation is this idea of digital, right? It's the classic old versus young battle, but it's really not the specific tech that should concern us as brand and retailers. It's what each generation wants to do with digital. And I agree with Linda when somebody asked the question, people don't want to spend on digital. And Linda's response was, because the term digital can be quite scary for organizations, right? Thinking about that in new ways. So you look at the silent generation, what's digital, right? But really, what they are looking for digital and what it has done for them from a technology is just a basic connection to the world. We're definitely seeing that play out today. Baby boomers are more learners, right? All about information and sharing with others, and have a really high concentration on social media platforms like Facebook because they want to share. Generation X, again, my generation, the adopter generation. It's all about using and progressing. And for Generation X, technology has really been the gateway to be more efficient, to be more productive, really enhance quality of life, both personally and professionally. Definitely playing out today. Millennials, here come the natives, right? We talked a lot about millennials. For years, we've been talking about millennials. It's all about personalizing, and it's all about the experience. Now, I'm the mother of 2 millennials, and I never remember growing up in that age having multiple devices that had to be taken away from me, right? I had no devices, let alone more than one. But really, it's about that experience, and that trickles up to actually older generations as well. And then Gen Z, I made that label up, digital just is. There might be a better label for that. I'm not a digital expert, but I thought it was really representative of they're looking for full immersion entertaining. So again, it's understanding how the generations are using the technology. And don't even ask me about the alphas. Who knows? Could they be complete rejectors of digital, complete rejectors of technology? Maybe some of the things coming out of COVID and go completely tactile and analog. Who knows? Time will tell. All right, so how do we respond to these generational differences in such an unprecedented time as this? We've gotten all the way to slide 10, and I haven't even told you about the new groundbreaking generational cohort we need to explore. And then again, I would ask you to tell me what you think E stands for. I did start to allude to a little bit when I talked about Generation Z being the final generation. But this is really welcome to Generation Everyone. No, it wasn't extraordinary. There is something extraordinary underlying it. But I'm sure everyone, welcome to Generation Everyone, where technology unites, behaviors shift, and really humanity shines. Some of you might be saying, seriously, we waited for this. I'm not going to say that this is going to show up in the marketing textbook as the next big thing, but given the world that we're living in, we've done a lot of reflection about that and how fast things changed overnight. It's really more of a provocation to consider as we think about 2 things as brand and retailers. There's 2 things coming out of this, and I know this has come up throughout the day, but I want to repeat it for emphasis. We need to think about relevancy, and we need to think about relatability, all right, and how those 2 things are going to help us emerge in this post-COVID world, because we were united as humans in an instant. This is one of my favorite images that I've come across when I think about the role and how we almost changed overnight. This is a group of seniors who adapted to their new reality by teaching an improv class on Zoom. And the technology wasn't the only new behavior. They had to learn that. The acting class was too. And then finding new ways and different ways. The tech was just the conduit. And it really pretty much was an overnight transformation to be able to adopt that. We know that in our times that we're in, technology is uniting us as generations like no other time in the history that most of us have been alive. But technology unites, but human really delivers. And again, these stats you probably heard today, Zoom, what's going up with their stock, online grocery delivery, up 198% by some estimates, BOPUS, buy online pick up at store, surging 208%, and the list goes on and on. What this is really saying is that generation everyone was born almost overnight. Essentials and basics had to get to people regardless of their comfort level with digital platforms. Seniors downloading apps, setting up accounts, younger families ordering delivery for the first time. Everyone did what they had to do, and the number skyrocketed. The brands and retailers that won on this front were the ones that already had the infrastructure in place, and really the innovation pipeline was going strong. I love this picture. I pulled this off of Walmart's Instagram, and I'm not sure if you can see it. It's projecting, but it says, when an 83-year-old customer asked Walmart optician Sandy for help grocery shopping, not only did she help the gentleman in store, she also set up an email account for him and showed him how to shop online for essentials in the future. And it says, Sandy, we can't thank you enough, right? This is a retailer that really had to step up and really had to become a hero in this time of unrest. And it was a simple thing of teaching that senior how to use the tech. But the tech alone wasn't going to make the difference. It was the humanness that was shining through. So you hear us talk a lot at Fitch about PhD, that's physical, human, digital. You need the combination of all three. And while some need to be dialed up more than others at times, it's the seamless combination of these three that really provide the true differentiation. So one of the things coming out of all this, right, we could go on and on about the stats of everything that had to be adopted practically overnight to meet our basic needs and what we deemed essential. The key questions our clients are asking us, is this new behavior sticky or is this a passing fancy? And it's probably mostly sticky. Frictionless had to be delivered to get things to people when they were in a state of panic. So retailers like Amazon and Walmart, Target, others had to step up big time. Initially, they struggled. Linda talked about that. They weren't meeting some of the demands. But those with the spirit of innovation already at the heart of who they are, in their DNA, they quickly rallied. They were able to respond, and those retailers that did not have that in their DNA will likely not survive, and that the reason that we answer it doesn't really matter, because the days are gone for legacy retail and brands who are laggards in innovation. And I think that's really, really proving itself out. So we pose the question, could intentionally connecting generational cohorts help brands and retailers become more adaptable, more nimble, more innovative? Yes, and to be honest, it actually takes the pressure off a bit. Without having to dig really deep into the differences, but focusing on the unifying elements and between the different generations. That will help us what we call stretch our relevance rather than just maintain it, especially as we come out of this. So what that really says to us is one of our key takeaways is we as brand and retailers have an opportunity to transform our thinking from this idea of segment and separating, where everything is very linear and logical and time-consuming, to this idea of simplifying and speed up, real-time, responsive, and now. Expensive studies. Now, I am not saying that a brand or retailer does not have to do a segmentation study, but any of you have lived through that, you know that they are extremely expensive. They take way more time than we ever thought that they would. When really a spirit of innovation and being real-time and responsive is really leveraging these quick hit insights. And they can be extremely powerful and extremely economical. And we think that's going to be a great way to set ourselves up for success coming out of this. From this idea of segmenting, separating, where it's hard to prioritize who we should go after, to actually having the spirit of everyone matters. Everyone did matter in this situation, right? We had just stuck to, well, we only cater to the baby boomers, or we only cater to a subsection of young families in Generation Y. We're going to miss out on opportunities. And finally, can almost be impossible to predict behavior, but prediction's not necessary when we open ourselves up to generation everyone. So as I kind of close on the last few slides, so is COVID-19 the end of the great generational divide? Were shopping behaviors and adoption of tech have aligned? Perhaps, at least for now, right? Now, how comfortable different generations have been with some of these new things that they've had to adapt as a necessity, time will tell, but we believe a lot of them are going to stick. But the one thing that was different were the mindsets that affect about the attitudes about the severity of the crisis. So and these are things that I know as brand and retailers you're taking a look at, and we have to think about that as we start innovating beyond. The silent generation has a fear of isolation and death right now. We need to comfort them. Baby boomers, it's crazy. They're all about socializing and a little bit of the hoarding behavior. We might need to warn them. Generation X is equipped, and we're ready to handle this because of what we've survived before. We need to support them. Millennials have this huge worry for their boomer parents. They're the ones saying, Mom, Dad, please don't go out and socialize with your neighbors. They're worried for them. And then finally, Gen Z, as we're young and invincible, YOLO, maybe we just shake our heads at them. But anyway, the attitudes are different, but the behaviors are uniting and starting to stick. So the good news in all of this, and we talked about PhD, humanity does transcend generations. I challenge everyone who's watching this to do this type of social media post. Either do it personally or professionally for your brand. I did it within the last 3 to 5 days. Fill in the blank. I never would have tried X if not for this pandemic. Watching The Office, and these are all by every generation's represented here. Silent generation, millennials, boomers. My kids made me, and I loved it. Silent Gen, getting the Wii out for daily exercise. We haven't played it in years. Another Silent Gen, virtual doctor appointments. We liked it. My love of plants and actually keeping them alive. Bread making and mindfulness with my kids. TikTok, and I'm old. Making my own, it goes on and on. I had to cull it down to just a few, but you get the point there, right? Use these, embrace these, use these new behaviors as you start to ideate. Find out where people's mindsets are. It's gold to a brand that's looking to be relevant and relatable. So final slide here, embrace, welcome, and celebrate Generation E. We promise it's going to be empowering to your decision making. It's going to be really enlightening to your teams as you start to break down those barriers. Exciting to follow for sure. Encouraging in this time of unrest. Evolutionary in its transformation of your thinking. And really an extraordinary way to thrive in this post-COVID world. Yep, that's it. So really appreciate it. Thank you for your time, for your attention, and enjoy the rest of the talks this evening. Thank you so much.